Welcome into a Thursday, March 6th edition of Daily Faceoff Live. We'll call it Trade Deadline Eve here on the show. Tyler Yaremchuk and Frank Seravalli with you. The show, as always, a presentation of Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Frank, 24 plus 3. What are we? 27 hours away from the deadline? I need my counter in the corner.
26 hours and 59 minutes, and we'll have a countdown on tomorrow's 5-hour trade deadline Daily Face-Off Live special. I've said it before, but a proper tease, the only place you can get breaking news and analysis top level without commercials, without a subscription, without a geo-lock. You can watch on your phone, you can watch on your car, you can watch on your TV. It's the Daily Face-Off Live trade deadline special, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. Me and you and a whole cast of characters.
Yeah, it's going to be a ton of fun. It always is. And it sounds like we could have some potentially big trades to talk about as well. So let's kick off right there, Frank. It's our nightcap. It's brought to you by JP Wiser's, proud to be the official whiskey of the NHL, offering Canadian hockey fans a premium drink choice to enhance every game night experience across the country. JP Wiser's, the official whiskey of game night. And Frank, let's start with maybe something that's developed since last night, and that is Mikko Rantanen. He is now number 1 on your trade targets board. Take me through what's led to him rocketing up your board.
Yeah, we're getting close to a dramatic conclusion to this trade deadline, one way or the other. Is Mikko Rantanen staying or is he going? And so here's what we can share at this point in time. One, the teams that have been calling about Mikko Rantanen have been informed that he will not be signing an extension in Carolina between now and Friday at 3 p.m. So he's given the non-committal answer. It's not no, it's not forever no, it's just not right now. And that has led the Carolina Hurricanes to field offers, and sources indicate that they're sifting through multiple, quote, compelling offers for Rantanen at this time. And they're trying to weigh in this position of power that they're in. People might sit back and say, hey, this is an unenvious spot to be in. I would argue the opposite. You either are getting a significant return for Mikko Rantanen, one of the top producing players in the regular season and playoffs of his generation, or you're keeping that guy for a playoff run. We've been saying for years, the Canes don't have a difference maker. This is their game breaker. So are you keeping him or are you taking the return? It's really incredibly juicy.
Yeah, and I keep hearing a lot of people saying, like, well, if you're the Canes, you can't lose them for nothing. You can't lose them for nothing. And I want to push back on that a little bit because, again, it is not nothing, Frank. Like you said, he is a rental, but then also you are still the only team that come July 1st can offer him an 8-year deal. So not only do you get to keep him for a playoff run, you are still giving yourself a leg up come summertime at re-signing him.
And maybe you convince him during that period of time that he wants to remain a Cane. But here's the other part of that. Every single team that would be trading for Mikko Rantanen between now and tomorrow would not be re-signing him now. Anyone would be rolling the dice just the same way that the Hurricanes are now. It's been comical to see the replies from people saying, the Canes have bungled this. Why? You've got one of the best players in the world that you acquired. The production has been lower than you expected. The underlying numbers and metrics are there. They still believe he's the best possible fit for their organization. But now other teams are stepping up, potentially ready to knock their socks off. All that they really gave up here, one way or the other, is 1.5 years of Marty Necas. Because think back to last summer, and this context is super important. When they tried to trade Marty Necas, the best offer they got, I believe, was 2 second-round picks. So they hung on to him. They signed him to a 2-year deal. He's had a monster season. They were not going to pay him the raise to stay a year from now or starting on July 1st to keep him. So they get out in front of it and they trade him. They didn't trade a first-round pick or any of their top 5 prospects. Again, second deadline in a row, second time they've gotten the best player available ahead of it. I think they're in a totally fine spot. And look, I look at the way the playoff bracket sets up, and I'm not going to say this is my total honest opinion or view of the situation right now. Sources indicate that this is a total toss-up. Could stay, could go, like flip a coin, 50-50 either way. I like the Canes' path in the playoffs here. The New Jersey Devils just went out and traded for Brian Dumoulin this morning on their back end, second round pick, 50% retained, and prospect Herman Traff, who was part of the Sweden World Junior team. He was a third round pick last year. Okay, so New Jersey trades for Brian Dumoulin. Here's the standings. Here's the Canes' path. You get the Devils in round 1, and then if you win, you likely get the Caps in round 2. Do either the Devils or the Caps scare you if you're the Canes? Probably not. So the worst case scenario, I put that in air quotes, the worst case scenario is you keep Mikko Rantanen, the game breaker, for a playoff run that includes that path. Pretty good spot.
Just because I think this is an interesting question, and some people have floated it out. Can Colorado trade back? Yes, but that is only because it was Chicago who kept the initial 50%. So the Hawks cannot trade for Mikko Rantanen, but if Colorado wanted to, they absolutely could. And Frank,
I was thinking about this because someone had messaged me this. Like, what if the Colorado Avalanche offered back to the Canes Marty Necas, Jack Drury, and a second round pick? Would the Canes do it? I don't think they would. I really don't.
Interesting. All right. Continuing along the point you made about the Canes and where they line up. And it's like, okay, New Jersey round 1, maybe Washington round 2. How much does that scare you? I'll tell you what, it doesn't scare me nearly as much as a potential round 1 matchup against the Tampa Bay Lightning, which is exactly what one of Florida or Tampa Bay, or Toronto, I should say, are staring down. And after Tampa Bay goes and loads up once again yesterday, they go get Oliver Bjorkstrand and Yanni Gourde from the Seattle Kraken. The return the other way, Mikey Esimont, 2 first-round picks, and a second-round pick as well. So Seattle gets a haul. Focusing on Tampa Bay, I love the line from Julien Brisebois, who said, I'd rather have a lineup of good players than a bank of good draft picks.
Totally agree. I still think a significant price to pay. Those two things can be true at the same time. And I always think back to what Steven Stamkos said a couple years ago when he was still captain of the Tampa Bay Lightning. We don't care about draft picks. And no team, no roster of players in the moment trying to win a Stanley Cup ever cares about first round picks that are out the door that are very also likely to be late in the first round. So they bring back a familiar face that they believe, because of that familiarity with Yanni Gourde, who stepped on the ice today wearing his familiar number 37 with the Tampa Bay Lightning at morning skate. They bring back a guy that they believe they can extend, and Bjorkstrand has term on his deal. So that justified the cost for them. That essentially the way they're thinking about it is these are two guys that are going to be under contract. So that, I think, certainly diminishes the risk on their part. And then moving forward, look, the Lightning think that these two guys can help put them over the top, and hard to argue with Gourde's previous playoff success and that familiarity that John Cooper would have with him in the lineup, even though I think he's taken a significant step back. But he says he feels good, and Tampa is no joke. That team has been one of the best teams in the league for a month now. They've got Andrei Vasilevskiy back. He's obviously rested, just coming off of a Four Nations face-off break. And this is, you look at their lineup moving forward, like I believe they're a team that now swapping out Steven Stamkos for Jake Gensel is really well positioned moving forward with Hagel and Cirelli and Paul and obviously Kucherov and Point. That why can't it be the Tampa Bay Lightning that breaks through to be that team that wins the Stanley Cup again?
Well, and we talked about this a week ago, but if you want any other, or maybe the biggest reason to believe in them, is Andrei Vasilevsky's back and looking like the old Andrei Vasilevsky. Last year was a down year, had the surgery, missed a few months, sat around a 900 basically all season. This year, he's a game breaker once again. So not only do you now have a forward group that's gone from, weak in terms of depth to all of a sudden it's a strength, their depth, being able to throw Gourde and Bjorkstrand out as a third line, but you still have one of the best goalies in the world backstopping it all.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's why I think it made sense for them to go for it this time.
Yeah, and just looking, someone said it's a steep price to pay for these two. But again, you get Bjorkstrand for another year. We know Yanni Gourde loves it in Tampa Bay, pending UFA. They have $9-ish million in cap space with basically their roster already set. Would anyone be the least bit surprised if it's Yanni Gourde signing a sweetheart deal July 1 or even before then with Tampa?
Not for me. Not at all. And I also just think although the price is high, Julian Breezebau's track record is really impressive. Whether it's Coleman and Goodrow or Hagel or Paul, or, when you make big swings like this, you're going to have a miss. And Tanner Jeannot was the miss. He was the turd. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 picks out the door, that hurt. But the team, obviously has rebounded and they're in a pretty good spot moving forward.
Let's talk about the flip side of this deal, Frank, and the Seattle Kraken. So we all kind of expected Yanni Gourde would be out the door. Oliver Bjorkstrand, maybe not quite a lock, but he was on your trade targets board and he had moved up a bit in recent weeks. But let's talk about the two other names that are in your top 20 on Seattle, Jamie Alexiak and Brandon Tanev. Is Ron Francis now, does he kind of like have the itch? Is he like, ooh, getting first round picks is fun. Let's grab a few more here. Like, do you think it's a lock both these guys go, or is that too aggressive of a word?
No, I think lock is certainly the word to use for Brandon Tanev. I think Jamie Alexiak, not nearly as much, but certainly when you look at how thin this market is, and when you look at what Brian Dumoulin just got, the better of the second round picks from the Winnipeg Jets or the Edmonton Oilers in that trade, plus a third round pick prospect, I'm looking at this going, okay, that's Dumoulin, who isn't nearly as impactful as Alexiak and doesn't have term on his deal. If you're Seattle and someone's coming at you with a significantly better offer than that, I think you've got to do it. And Alexiak has the size to be that impact guy. Tanev obviously is going to be, with his different elements and skill set, certainly going to be someone that's worth watching. And it's developed in a way that, look, Seattle's not going to be in a position to say no. And I really liked what Ron Francis said after the fact, that he's made a commitment to getting this thing moving in the right direction. And the best way to do that and to find difference makers is to accumulate these picks that you can then package to get something that is really meaningful.
Yeah, or you just start taking shots in the first round. And eventually, even if they're late first round picks, you hope that you find your way, stumble your way, draft your way into a superstar. It's better than the status quo in Seattle. And like you said, Ron Francis kind of alluding to that a little bit. Let's continue along to the other news we got last night. It actually was a pretty busy evening around the NHL. And I do want to dig in more to that Brian Dumoulin trade in just a second. But the Utah extensions we got yesterday, Vejmelka locks in 5 years by 4.75. Ian Cole gets a 1-year extension. Alex Kerfoot gets a 1-year deal. Is this at all Bill Armstrong kind of putting his hand up and saying like, hey, I'm not going to add much, but I'm also not going to subtract anything. Like, these guys are here to stay?
Yeah, he made a statement last week saying that he believes that this team has done enough or has earned the right to stay together. And hard to argue with that. And you look at these two extensions for Cole and Kerfoot, those guys both actually end up taking a pay cut from what they were making last year. So they show a commitment to the team, 1-year deal to stay. Vejmelka is a guy that, really, you could argue either way. Is it Oli Mata or is it Karel Vejmelka that ended up saving Utah Hockey Club's season when they lost two of their top four defensemen, I should say, for a period of 5 months in John Marino and Sean Durzi? Mata comes in and stabilizes it, but also at a time when Connor Ingram needed some time away from the rink and his game fell apart. He stepped up in a huge way, a huge contract season. And if you listened to the show yesterday, you heard me tease that Utah Hockey Club had made progress on Vejmelka's deal by virtue of the deal that Kevin Lankinen signed in Vancouver. That set the table. I think Vejmelka's camp was looking to get to $5 million a year on a 5-year deal. The Utah Hockey Club was at the exact Lankinen deal, and they ended up splitting the difference at $4.75. And now they've got that locked up for the future as well. So they're in a great spot. They don't have any sort of, names hanging over their head at this deadline. Should we sell this guy? Should we not? No, they've gone out. They've made the commitment. It's not going to box them out from anything either if they want to make a move. And keep an eye on Utah Hockey Club, because I think they are a sneaky contender, not just to make the playoffs this season and beat out Vancouver or Calgary or St. Louis, one of these teams that's in the mix, but you've heard me say many times throughout this year that I think there's no team in the NHL that's better prepared to make a big splash and be prepared for the future than Utah, with their cap space, their contract statuses, their prospect pool, and their picks. There's no chance that they could possibly even sign all of these guys that they've drafted. They don't have room on the roster limitation, so they're going to have to be very careful who they keep and who they don't, which just leaves them in an enviable position to go out and chase one of these big names that's out there. I have zero doubt that Bill Armstrong has been calling and checking in on Mikko Rantanen, and he could undoubtedly do it. I just wonder, with this team in this exact moment in time, could he pull it off, knowing that he's likely to be a rental? Could you take that risk?
Yeah, you talk about the future. So the defensemen they have locked up for next season: Sergachev, Durzi, Marino, Cole, Mata, Kesselring, and Maverick Lamoureux. On top of that, both their goalies are signed. On top of that, I believe they have 11 forwards already under contract, $14.5 million in cap space. They could do some damage this summer. Let's continue along, Frank, get to our big segment for the day. It's an all-new edition of Icebreakers, and it's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, where you can get a custom ring built and delivered in less than 4 weeks through the Charm Masterpiece program. It all comes with their unbeatable pricing policy, and on top of that, you can apply for a Charm Diamond Flexity card today and get approved for no interest financing on your purchase in minutes. Check out their large selection of Canadian lab-grown diamonds and mine diamonds by visiting them online at charmdiamondcenters.com. All right, Frank, let's start with some breaking news from today that Brian Dumoulin is going to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for a second-round pick and a prospect, 50% retention on the cap hit there as well. So I guess let's start with the price here. This feels high, and it feels high for a New Jersey team to pay it, considering they just lost Jack Hughes for the whole season.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And the funny thing about that is when I watched New Jersey's defense, I think it's actually been one of the stronger assets of their team so far this year. They've defended as a group, and their commitment to defend has been way better year over year, which has also their goaltending has improved, and that's been a really nice combination. So, so Dumoulin comes in, veteran presence, helped the Penguins to back-to-back Stanley Cups, and a relatively significant price to pay for a guy that I had way further. He was on my board, but way further down, because I was curious to see what kind of return Anaheim could get. Did they get to a place where, hey, maybe they said, maybe we'll just keep him and hang on to him as we're making our own kind of playoff push here. So, look, I think New Jersey's still going to be aggressive. They've got, the interesting part is that they did have the Ducks retain and were clearly willing to pay a little bit more for the retainment. That because they've got Hughes on LTIR, what else are they cooking up? What do they need that space for that they didn't just take Dumoulin at full boat?
Yeah, I mean, with the LTIR pool, though, they could go up to $13 million. Like, I'm a little bit puzzled by the retaining side of this. Like, there's no way you spend $13.1 million in LTIR space before tomorrow.
Well, there is a way. I mean, for sure there's a way. And that's the thing with LTIR. When you're operating in that, you're taking on the full hit, not the prorated. So that is the complicating part of it.
With the Devils, would it all make sense to maybe see them, and this is just me drawing connections in my brain, go after a young forward with term? To me, if you're going to give up assets this year, I don't think you're an authentic Stanley Cup contender. Didn't think you were with Hughes, never mind without him. But if you could go get a whatever, Middlestat, Byram, go down the list of guys with term, then couldn't you kind of sit there and say, hey, we're not totally screwing ourselves, because next year, look how good our forward group's going to be.
I agree. I think that's the way to approach it. If you're New Jersey, get aggressive if you want, but make it for someone that is under control, that you either have cost certainty on, fits your age scheme, or someone that you can re-sign. So I think they're in a spot that they could be aggressive on that front. And I think one of the perfect candidates that you mentioned is Casey Middlestat. High skill, talented guy that hasn't been as consistent as they wanted him to be in Colorado, that he would make perfect sense to me.
Let's continue along. Another move that happened last night that had, everybody raising an eyebrow was the swap between the Penguins and Predators. So Michael Bunting has an appendicitis, so he's out for the foreseeable future. Nashville still acquires him and moves on from both Tommy Novak and Luke Schenn. Frank, these are two teams that are nowhere near the playoffs, swapping players with term. Can you explain this to me?
I really struggled in the moment. This was one of those ones that wasn't really on anyone's radar, because you're going two non-playoff teams, term, on its surface. And I said this on the DFO rundown earlier today, which generated a ton of traction on social media. That wasn't the point. But I said on its surface, when you think about it, this could be one of the dumber trades that we've seen over the last 25 years. Like, what's the impetus to do any of this now? But then you take a step back and you say, okay, let's think about the connections here. And Kyle Dubas did come out after the trade via email to say we really value Luke Schenn and his character and all those things. And he obviously traded for him in Toronto, so knows him. But I think immediately to the connections that Kyle Dubas has in the league. Who's he closest with? If it's not Ron Francis is his closest friend or connection, then it's Doug Armstrong in St. Louis. And so then you think of the other guy that's in St. Louis, who's Braden Schenn, and it's either does he trade Luke Schenn to St. Louis to unite them and then they go somewhere else, or does he just help Armstrong facilitate a deal that we've heard talked about a lot, which is some team out there is trying to, get the Schenn brothers together. That's the other kind of dot to connect here. So on its surface, doesn't make a ton of sense, especially because, as you said, bunting, not part of the foreseeable future of the Preds. The Penguins obviously get who I would say is the most impactful player in the deal in Tommy Novak. So I could understand wanting to get him, but would that have been a move that waited until the summer? There's obviously a reason to do it now.
As we look at the defensive market, again, will the Penguins flip Luke Schenn? Who knows? But with this return for Dumoulin, Frank, I start going through the other team or the other guys on your list. And I mean, whether it's Schenn, Ryan Suter, the guys with term, we talked about Alexiak. We haven't talked about a guy like Carson Soucy, though, in a few days. Like, this could kind of go one of two ways. Like, teams could sit there and go, whoa, Dumoulin went for that. Okay, we got to gulp and pay whatever the price is for these guys. Or could teams sit there and go, oh shit, I'm not paying that much for a bottom pairing defenseman?
I think there's a bit of both. You're going to see teams react both ways. Some are just going to say, yeah, that's good, we're out. Or you're going to see some teams knuckle down and say, yeah, like, well, at least Soucy has term. Like, let's pay that price. He's younger. He's a better defender than Dumoulin. And I think there's tons of reasons if you're Vancouver to all of a sudden be excited about, well, we were in a situation before where, we'd like to get off of the Soucy contract for next year as we sort of rebuild our defense and what it looks like. He's got some versatility, can play the right side. That 1 year at $3 million. The only complicating factor is that he's got the full no trade clause, which I believe it's been pretty quiet on that front to this point, that the Canucks had sent out a memo to all 31 other teams. I guess about a month ago now, 3 weeks or so. It was the Monday after the Marcus Pettersson deal, and said, hey, he's available, come get him. And since then, crickets.
Last one for me for this edition of Icebreakers, Frank. And, obviously Rantanen skyrockets up to number one. Was there anyone else lower down on your list that you were like close to really pushing up your board at all? Anyone like Besser's up to 12? Is that maybe the guy?
No, Besser has stayed there. He's been pretty constant at 12. The one guy that I did move up is Rickard Rakell from 9 to 6. I was thinking about the Rakell situation that the Penguins are in. And look, this is probably the best value that Rickard Rakell is ever going to have for the Pittsburgh Penguins while he's on this deal. So can they somehow make that happen and get value in return for him? Like, I was trying to size up some fits, and this is purely just me spitballing, but I'm looking at a team like Vegas, who's always in the mix. And I said, a really nice check down option for Vegas would be to bring back Riley Smith from New York. That said, if the Golden Knights could somehow fit in Rakell's cap hit this year and the cap is increasing, that's another really potential impactful scoring winger that you're adding to your team, that obviously bringing in Brandon Saad, they were interested in doing. So could that be a similar type fit? Which other teams would be in the mix to land someone like Rickard Rakell?
Interesting. All right, there you go. That is a wrap on this week's edition of Icebreakers, brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers. All right, Frank, I wanted to save some time for the listener questions today, and let's try to maybe get through as many as we can here. JRP, any rumors on what the Caps might be interested in doing?
It's been rather quiet on the Caps front. We've been saying for a while that they're a team that really likes their squad, and I don't know how much they want to tinker. I'm sure they're listening and monitoring the market, but Ryan Leonard could be that big trade deadline addition. And as I always remind Caps fans, the big guy that they brought in 2018 for their playoff run was Michael Kempny for a 3rd round pick. And that ended up working out pretty well.
Yeah, sometimes it's not the big, sexy first round pick for this guy move that ends up doing the trick. We got a couple of questions on the Leafs. Julian wants to know, what do you think of a Donato and Murphy package? Patrick just wants to know straight up, will Tree Living acquire both a defenseman and a center at the deadline?
I think that's probably pretty likely, Patrick. And I think the unfortunate part for a Murphy and Donato package, which I thought some team would have been wise to do, is that the Hawks don't have any retained salary transaction slots left. So they can't retain on Murphy. And so you're talking about the Leafs adding $6 million of cap, plus it's like 6 point something, 6.4. They can't do that without trading out $6 million in cap space. So I think that's probably pretty unlikely. And Toronto's going to have to require some retention from other teams along the way to pay extra for.
Umit is in, what teams could be in on Mario Ferraro? Could he be worth a first round pick for the Sharks?
I think he could be at this point. Look, solid defender, another team without any retained salary transaction slots. I think the Sharks are ready, willing, and able to move on from Mario Ferraro. Great character guy to add to a team. And as mentioned, a pretty staunch defender. So he's a guy that's been on my board for a bit, monitoring pretty closely, and we'll see what happens.
Forecheck, backcheck, paycheck. What are the Avs going to do? Are they done, or are they still shopping for a 2C? Could it be just wing depth?
Not done. Definitely still shopping for a 2C. They've got the Landeskog money to spend. I think winger depth is possible. I also wouldn't be surprised to see Colorado go out and get another defenseman. They brought in Ryan Lindgren, but I think that D-core could still definitely use a boost to be way more closer to contender status.
Would it be fair to say that the market for defensemen is a seller's market, but the market for forwards might be trending towards being a buyer's market?
I've been saying for a while that it's a buyer's market at forward. And then people say, look at this trade for Yanni, Gourde, and Bjorkstrand. It is absolutely a seller's market. And I'm like, okay, but that's just what Julien Brisebois does. Like,
yeah,
we didn't even talk about Tanner Jeannot before, and he created a market for him and paid. Our minds have been blown at the return for almost every Tampa Bay trade that's been made of late. It's like he hones in on his guy, got blinders on, and goes and gets him. And it's like, I don't really care what the price is, which more credit to him, but I wouldn't say that that's indicative of the rest of the market. So I think the relative scarcity of defensemen has ratcheted that up. Think about it. There's really not many at all right shot guys, and there's like no right shot rental guys available. So it's a tough market on that front. And I just look at the forward group and I say, okay, there's going to be some check down options here. Like someone's going to go out and get Brock Nelson. And then the teams that are also looking for a center are going to be like, well, we don't really want to be left with nothing. So someone's going to grab Scott Lawton. But then what happens to Ryan Donato? What happens to these other guys that I don't think it's been a burgeoning market for the rest of those guys yet? GMs are sitting, waiting, like how close to the deadline can we get before we put something real on the table?
Quickly, one more here because we got two questions on it. Joe watches our show every day. Could you see Kreider getting dealt? Scuba says, will the Rangers make a big move, maybe for a D-man? What do you think New York gets up to?
I don't think New York is going to be crazy active. Again, Chris Drury's always got his finger on the pulse. I think if they could try and find a way to make a big swing and get someone that has team control or fits their age scheme, yes. I do think it's a lock that Riley Smith ends up getting moved. And if Riley Smith moving was the only transaction the New York Rangers made between now and Friday, I wouldn't be surprised. I still think their biggest thing is they got to figure out their defense. Fox, Schneider, who else is there? And Zach Jones could be traded. I thought last weekend was a clear showcase opportunity. Teams are calling on Keandre Miller. I just think that they've got a bunch of different irons in the fire. And if someone meets that price, they're going to be moving.
All right, let's move along to our daily bets for Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Pretty simple slate for me today. There's a couple of road dogs that I actually really like. The Columbus Blue Jackets taking on the Florida Panthers. Panthers are red hot 4 in a row, but when you get a team who's in the playoff mix at plus 250, that's just a bit too high of a price for me. So I'm going to get on Columbus. I'm also going to jump on the Seattle Kraken, who are not a great road team, but again, they're taking a struggling Nashville Predators team who just sold off 2 pretty useful NHLers in Tommy Novak and Luke Shannon. Don't have anyone to add into the lineup. So give me the Kraken as road dogs. I know they just sold off as well, but again, plus 110. I like that side of the coin flip. Kraken or Blue Jackets, Frank? Which one would you ride with me on?
The Kraken.
Plus 110. I don't mind it. Let's wrap up the show, Frank. A little lighthearted garbage time for everybody. And while everyone's sweating who's getting traded the playoff race, the San Jose Sharks are out here having sleepovers. I love this. Tyler Toffoli texting his wife, Kat, saying, I got to have a sleepover with Will and Mac tonight. I lost a bet on the bus. And the right side of this is you see Tyler Toffoli on a cot in the hotel room with the two youngsters. I don't know. I just thought this was funny. Having a good vet like Toffoli around when it's a losing season, keeping things light with guys like Celebrani and Smith. I think it's a nice story what Toffoli's done there.
Not to be Johnny Lazarus with the vibe check, but like the vibes in San Jose have been legit all year, and they're in last place, worse than the Chicago Blackhawks this year. And watching those two teams, you'd have no idea they're next to each other in the standings, because the Sharks have seemingly had fun all year and the Blackhawks have seemingly had none.
Yeah, again, and I do think Mike Grier deserves some credit here. He's doing things in a really, really good way in San Jose. And in the last 12 months have totally flipped my perspective on how quickly they can maybe turn things around. So,
yep. Total managers in the NHL that have had a better calendar year than Mike Grier.
All right, that is a wrap. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. Things get going an hour earlier than we usually do, and they go a whole heck of a lot longer than we usually do. A 5-hour trade deadline live show. Myself, Frank, Carter Hutton, Matt Barnaby, Johnny Lazarus, Irfan Gaffar, Nate Thompson, and our managing editor, Matt Larkin, all going to be in the mix tomorrow. 5 hours, commercial-free, trade talk, instant analysis, and breaking news faster than you will get it anywhere else. Look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow at 9 a.m. Until then, keep your tweet notifications on. Stay locked to dailyfaceoff.com because it could be a busy 24 hours. Enjoy the day. We'll chat tomorrow. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Seravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.